The magic lettuce. In a kingdom where fertile valleys stretched between gentle hills and farmers took great pride in the abundance their land produced, there lived a poor couple named Thomas and Margaret who had very little in the way of material wealth but possessed hearts overflowing with love for each other and hope for their future. They lived in a small, humble cottage at the very edge of the village, with a tiny garden barely large enough to grow the vegetables they needed to survive. Thomas worked as a day laborer in the fields of wealthier farmers, earning just enough to keep them fed and their modest roof maintained, while Margaret tended their small plot with dedicated care, coaxing every possible bit of nourishment from their limited soil. Despite their poverty, they were happy together, finding joy in simple pleasures and dreaming of the day when they might have a child to complete their family and fill their cottage with laughter and love. After many years of hoping and praying, Margaret finally became pregnant, and both she and Thomas were overjoyed beyond measure. But as the pregnancy progressed, Margaret developed the strangest and most intense craving that neither of them had ever encountered. She became utterly obsessed with a particular type of lettuce called Rapunzel that grew in the garden of their neighbor, a mysterious and reclusive woman named Dame Gothel who lived in a tall, imposing house surrounded by high walls that seemed designed to keep the entire world at a distance. Dame Gothel's garden was legendary throughout the village, filled with the most extraordinary vegetables, herbs, and flowers that grew nowhere else, tended with such skill and possibly magic that everything in it was larger, more vibrant, and more perfect than anything that grew in ordinary gardens. The Rapunzel lettuce in particular was famous for its incredible flavor and supposed medicinal properties, with leaves so crisp and green they seemed to glow with inner vitality. Margaret's craving for Dame Gothel's Rapunzel grew stronger each day until it consumed her every waking thought. She would stand at their cottage window that overlooked the forbidden garden, staring at the beautiful lettuce with desperate longing, feeling as if she would die if she couldn't taste it. "Thomas," she would say, her voice weak and pleading, her face pale and drawn with obsessive desire, "I must have some of that Rapunzel from Dame Gothel's garden. I know it's wrong to covet what belongs to someone else, but this craving is so powerful, so overwhelming that I feel I cannot survive without it. Please, my darling, won't you help me? Won't you find some way to get me just a small portion of that lettuce? I promise it's not mere selfishness. Something in my body, perhaps the baby, is demanding this specific food, and I feel I shall waste away without it." Thomas was deeply conflicted, torn between his love for his suffering wife and his knowledge that Dame Gothel was not someone to be trifled with or stolen from. The mysterious woman had a reputation throughout the village as powerful and possibly dangerous, someone who valued her privacy and her property above all else and who did not take kindly to trespassers or thieves. People whispered that she was a witch or sorceress, that she had powers beyond mortal understanding, that those who crossed her came to regret it in terrible ways. But as Thomas watched his beloved wife grow weaker and more desperate each day, watched her stop eating regular food because nothing satisfied the intense craving that dominated her entire being, he made the fateful decision that would change their lives forever. Late one night, when the moon was hidden behind clouds and darkness covered the land like a thick blanket, Thomas crept silently over Dame Gothel's high wall, his heart pounding with fear and guilt, his hands trembling as he dropped into the forbidden garden. The garden seemed even more magical and otherworldly in the darkness, with plants that seemed to glow with faint luminescence and shadows that moved in ways that had nothing to do with the gentle night breeze. Thomas quickly found the Rapunzel lettuce, its leaves indeed appearing to emit a soft green light, and he grabbed a large handful, stuffing it into the sack he'd brought, desperate to complete his theft and escape before being discovered. His conscience screamed at him that this was wrong, that stealing was a sin regardless of his motivations, that he was betraying his own values and risking terrible consequences, but his love for Margaret and his desperate need to ease her suffering overrode his moral compass. Thomas managed to climb back over the wall undetected and rushed home with his stolen prize, presenting it to Margaret with trembling hands and a heart heavy with guilt and foreboding. Margaret devoured the Rapunzel with desperate hunger, tears of relief streaming down her face, declaring it the most delicious thing she had ever tasted, more wonderful than she had even imagined. For a few days she seemed better, stronger, happier, her color returning and her health improving. But then, inevitably, the craving returned even more intensely than before, and Margaret begged Thomas to get her more Rapunzel, assuring him that just one more portion would be enough, that she wouldn't ask again, that this would satisfy her completely. Thomas, despite his better judgment and the terror that gripped his heart at the thought of returning to that forbidden garden, loved his wife too much to refuse her desperate pleas. Once again he crept over the wall in the dead of night. Once again he stole handfuls of the glowing Rapunzel, and once again he tried to escape unseen. But this time, as he turned to leave with his stolen lettuce, he found his path blocked by a tall, imposing figure who had appeared as silently as a shadow. Dame Gothel herself, standing with arms crossed and eyes blazing with fury and terrible power that made the very air around her crackle with magical energy. "Thief!" Dame Gothel's voice rang out like thunder, cold and hard as iron, echoing through the garden with unnatural volume. "How dare you violate my garden, steal my property, take what does not belong to you? Do you know who I am? Do you understand what you've done? I could turn you into a toad for your transgression, could curse you with endless suffering, could make you regret the day you were born. Give me one reason why I shouldn't punish you in the most terrible ways imaginable for your theft and trespass." Thomas fell to his knees, trembling with terror but also with desperate courage born of love and desperation. "Please, Dame Gothel," he begged, tears streaming down his face, his voice breaking with emotion and fear. "Please forgive me. I know what I did was terribly wrong, inexcusably wrong, and I have no right to ask for mercy. But my wife is pregnant, and she has developed such an intense craving for your Rapunzel that she grows weak and ill without it. I love her more than my own life, and I couldn't bear to watch her suffer. I stole from you out of love and desperation, not out of greed or malice. I will pay any price you demand, will work for you without wages for however long you require, will do anything to make amends for my crime. Please, I beg you, show mercy to a desperate man who acted foolishly out of love for his wife and unborn child." Dame Gothel stared down at the terrified, weeping man with an expression that was complex and difficult to read. Anger certainly, but also something else, something that might have been loneliness or ancient pain or bitter understanding of desperate need. She was silent for a long moment, and then she spoke in a voice that was cold and calculating but no longer thunderous with rage. "I will not turn you into a toad or curse you," she said slowly, each word measured and deliberate, "but neither will I simply forgive your theft without consequence. Here is my price. You may take all the Rapunzel you need for your wife, as much as she desires, whenever she requires it. I will not punish you for what you've already stolen. But in exchange, when your child is born, you will give that child to me. The baby will be mine to raise as my own, to keep as payment for your crime and for the Rapunzel that sustains its mother. This is my price. Agree to it, and your wife may eat her fill of Rapunzel until the child comes. Refuse and face the full consequences of your theft." Thomas felt as if his heart had been torn from his chest, as if the ground had opened beneath him to swallow him into darkness. Give up his child, his precious unborn baby, the fulfillment of years of hopes and dreams? It was unthinkable, impossible, too terrible to even consider. But what choice did he have? If he refused, Dame Gothel would punish him severely, possibly kill him, certainly prevent him from ever getting more Rapunzel for Margaret. And Margaret needed the Rapunzel. Without it, she grew so weak and ill that Thomas feared for her life and the baby's life. Between the certainty of losing both wife and child if he refused, and the terrible possibility of losing the child after birth if he agreed, Thomas made the agonizing choice that would haunt him for the rest of his days. I agree," Thomas whispered, the words like poison on his tongue, his soul screaming in anguish at what he was promising. "I agree to your price. The child will be yours when it is born. Just please let my wife have the Rapunzel she needs to survive until then." Even as he spoke the words, he hoped desperately that somehow he could find a way out of this terrible bargain, that some miracle would occur to save his child from this fate, that Dame Gothel might change her mind or forget or be moved to mercy when the time came. Dame Gothel smiled, but it was not a warm or kind smile. It was the satisfied smile of someone who had gotten exactly what they wanted, who had trapped someone in an agreement that could not be broken. "The bargain is sealed," she said, and Thomas felt magical energy pulse through the air like a binding contract written in power itself. "Take all the Rapunzel you need. Your wife will survive and thrive. And when the child is born, I will come to claim what is mine." With those ominous words, she vanished back into the shadows of her garden, leaving Thomas alone with his stolen lettuce and his terrible bargain, his heart breaking with grief and guilt and desperate, hopeless hope that somehow this nightmare would not come to pass. Margaret gave birth 9 months later to a beautiful baby girl with golden hair that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight and eyes as blue as summer skies. Thomas and Margaret named her Rapunzel, after the lettuce that had sustained Margaret through her pregnancy, and for 3 perfect, precious days, they held their daughter, loved her, sang to her, and tried to memorize every detail of her tiny face, knowing with heartbreaking certainty that these moments were all they would ever have. On the 3rd day, as they had known she would, Dame Gothel appeared at their cottage door, her expression implacable and determined, her hand extended to take what the bargain had promised her. "No, please!" Margaret screamed, clutching baby Rapunzel to her chest, tears streaming down her face in rivers of anguish and desperation. "Please don't take our baby. We'll give you anything else. All our money, our cottage, our very lives. Just please don't take our daughter. She's all we have, all we've ever dreamed of. Please, I'm begging you, have mercy. You must understand what it means to love a child. Please don't do this terrible thing." But Dame Gothel's expression remained cold and unmoved, though something flickered in her eyes that might have been old pain or buried regret. "A bargain is a bargain," she said firmly, her voice allowing no argument or negotiation. "Your husband agreed to these terms freely, and magic has sealed the agreement. The child is mine by right and by binding contract. I will raise her well, will give her everything she needs, will protect her and care for her in ways you never could with your poverty and limited resources. Perhaps this is a blessing rather than a curse. She will have a life of comfort and safety that you could never provide." With those words, Dame Gothel took baby Rapunzel from Margaret's arms despite her desperate struggles and anguished screams, and she carried the child away to her tall, imposing house with its high walls and mysterious garden. Thomas and Margaret were left alone in their cottage, their arms empty, their hearts shattered into pieces, their lives irrevocably destroyed by the terrible choice Thomas had made out of love and desperation. They would spend the rest of their days consumed by grief and guilt, watching from a distance as their daughter grew up in Dame Gothel's house, visible occasionally through windows but forever beyond their reach, a living reminder of the terrible price they had paid for stolen lettuce and desperate love. Dame Gothel raised Rapunzel in isolation, keeping her locked away from the world in a tower with no stairs and only one high window, accessible only by climbing Rapunzel's incredibly long golden hair that grew faster and longer than any normal hair should grow. The witch told Rapunzel that the outside world was dangerous and cruel, that people could not be trusted, that only Dame Gothel truly cared for her safety and well-being. She never told Rapunzel about Thomas and Margaret, never revealed that the girl had parents who loved her desperately and grieved for her every single day. She kept Rapunzel as a precious possession rather than a beloved daughter, beautiful and perfect but trapped and isolated, living a half-life that denied her freedom, choice, and the opportunity to experience the world beyond her prison tower. Years passed, and Rapunzel grew into a beautiful young woman of 18, with her golden hair now impossibly long, reaching all the way to the ground when she let it down from her tower window. She had never known anything but her tower and Dame Gothel's carefully controlled visits, had never experienced friendship or freedom or the vast, complex, beautiful world that existed beyond her limited view. She sang to pass the time, her voice pure and lovely, echoing across the countryside and catching the attention of a young prince named Stephen who was riding through the forest on a hunting expedition. Stephen heard Rapunzel's beautiful singing and followed the sound to the tower, where he witnessed Dame Gothel climbing up Rapunzel's hair to reach the high window. After the witch left, Stephen approached the tower and called up, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Rapunzel, having never encountered anyone but Dame Gothel in her entire life, was shocked to hear a different voice, but curiosity and desperate loneliness overcame her fear, and she let down her golden hair. Stephen climbed up, and for the first time in her life, Rapunzel met someone other than her captor. Someone young and kind, someone who treated her as a person rather than a possession, someone who opened her eyes to the possibility that the world might not be as terrible as Dame Gothel had always claimed. The kingdom celebrated Rapunzel and Stephen's wedding, and the young couple invited Thomas and Margaret to live with them in the palace, ensuring they would never again suffer poverty or separation from their beloved daughter. Dame Gothel, learning that her possessive control had failed and that Rapunzel had found happiness and freedom despite all her efforts to prevent it, disappeared from the kingdom entirely, vanishing into the wilderness to live alone with her bitterness and regret. Her garden, left untended, slowly returned to wilderness, the magical plants dying and the walls crumbling, a testament to the truth that beauty and abundance mean nothing when hoarded selfishly and used to control and possess rather than shared freely in love. As for the magic lettuce that had started everything, Rapunzel herself planted Rapunzel in the palace gardens and throughout the kingdom, sharing it freely with anyone who wanted it, especially pregnant women who craved it as her mother had. She made sure that no one would ever again face the terrible choice her father had faced, having to steal to provide for someone they loved, having to make impossible bargains with terrible consequences. The lettuce grew abundantly, beautiful and nourishing, but it was no longer magical in the dangerous way it had been in Dame Gothel's garden. Instead, it became a symbol of a different kind of magic. The magic of generosity over greed, of sharing over hoarding, of freedom over control, and of love that liberates rather than love that imprisons. And Rapunzel would tell her own children and anyone who would listen, the lessons she had learned from her unusual and painful story. Desperate circumstances can lead good people to make terrible choices, but love and forgiveness can heal even the deepest wounds. What we think we possess actually possesses us if we hold it too tightly, and the only way to truly keep something precious is to be willing to let it go free. Real love liberates rather than imprisons, shares rather than hoards, and trusts rather than controls. And sometimes the most valuable things in life, freedom, family, genuine love, are the things we can't steal or bargain for or lock away in towers. They can only be given freely, received gratefully, and cherished without trying to own or control them. The magic lettuce had taught them all an expensive lesson, paid for with years of separation and oceans of tears, but it was a lesson worth learning. That some prices are too high to pay, that some bargains should never be made, and that the only magic worth having is the magic of love that sets free rather than binds, that gives rather than takes, and that heals rather than wounds. And in the end, that was the greatest magic of all.